The janitor's name was Marcus Webb, and he had been working maintenance at Alcatraz Island for 11 years, long enough to know every corridor, every cell block, every hidden space in the crumbling fortress that sat in the middle of San Francisco Bay, like a concrete monument to America's penal past. He had started in 2013, hired by the National Park Service as part of the facility's maintenance crew, responsible for keeping the historic site safe and operational for the million-plus visitors who toured the island every year. The work was steady, the pay was decent, and there was something oddly peaceful about being on the island after the last ferry departed, when the tourists were gone and the only sounds were the wind, the waves, the crying of gulls, and the metallic groans of the old building settling on its foundation. On the evening of October 15, 2024, Webb was working the late shift, conducting routine maintenance in the main cell house after the final tour group had left at 7 p.m. The cell house was the heart of Alcatraz, a massive three-story structure that had housed some of America's most notorious criminals during the prison's operational years from 1934 to 1963. Men like Al Capone, Machine Gun Kelly, and Robert Stroud, the so-called Birdman of Alcatraz. The building had been closed as a prison for over 60 years, but it retained an oppressive atmosphere, a sense of confinement and desperation that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, from the hundreds of cells where men had lived in isolation, where riots had erupted, where escape attempts had been planned in whispered conversations during the hours when guards weren't watching. Webb's assignment that evening was to inspect and clean the ventilation system in D Block, the section of the prison that had housed the most dangerous inmates in segregation cells, where they spent 23 hours a day in solitude. The ventilation system was original to the 1930s construction, a network of metal ducts and grills that had been designed to provide minimal air circulation to cells that were otherwise sealed environments. The system required regular maintenance. Dust accumulated in the ducts, rust formed on the metal surfaces, and occasionally birds or rats found their way into the system and had to be removed before they died and created sanitation problems. Webb was on a ladder removing a ventilation grill from the wall of the D Block corridor when he noticed something unusual. The grill was held in place by 4 screws, and when he removed the last screw and pulled the grill away from the wall, he saw that the duct behind it was partially blocked, not by debris or an animal, but by something that had clearly been placed there deliberately, a bundle wrapped in what looked like plastic garbage bags, secured with duct tape, wedged into the duct about 3 feet back from the opening. Webb set the grill aside, pulled a flashlight from his tool belt, and shone it into the duct. The bundle was approximately the size of a shoebox, rectangular, the plastic bags darkened with age and dust, but still intact. He could see edges of what looked like paper or cardboard beneath the plastic, and there were shapes that suggested multiple objects inside. The bundle had been pushed far enough into the duct that it wouldn't be visible from the corridor unless you removed the grill and looked inside, which meant it had been hidden deliberately by someone who didn't want it found during casual inspection. Webb's first thought was that this was related to one of the historical escape attempts. Alcatraz had a famous history of escapes. 36 men had tried to escape during the prison's operational years, and while most had been caught or killed, 5 were never found and were presumed drowned in the cold waters of San Francisco Bay. The most famous attempt was the 1962 escape by Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, who had used improvised tools to tunnel through their cell walls and had disappeared into the bay on a raft made of raincoats. For decades, historians and treasure hunters had searched Alcatraz for artifacts related to the escapes, and any discovery of hidden items from the prison era was potentially significant. But as Webb pulled the bundle from the duct, carefully extracting it without tearing the plastic, he realized it wasn't from the 1960s. The plastic bags were modern, the duct tape was recent, and when he set the bundle on the floor and examined it more closely under his flashlight, he could see that one of the bags was partially transparent, revealing what looked like a cell phone inside. Not an old rotary phone or a prison-era communication device, but a modern smartphone, the kind that had been common in the 2010s. Webb radioed the shift supervisor, a woman named Sarah Chen, who had been with the Park Service for 15 years and who served as the night operations coordinator for Alcatraz. Chen responded immediately, asking Webb to describe what he had found and to secure the area. Webb explained about the bundle in the vent, about the plastic bags and the duct tape and the modern cell phone, and Chen's voice took on an edge of concern that Webb recognized from past incidents when unusual discoveries had been made on the island. "Don't open it," Chen said. "Photograph it in place, then bring it to the administration building. I'm going to call Park Police and the Investigative Services branch. This might be evidence in a criminal case." Webb photographed the bundle from multiple angles, documented the location of the vent grill, and then carefully carried the bundle out of the cell house and across the island to the administration building, a smaller structure near the dock where Park Service staff had offices and where evidence could be secured. Chen met him there, along with a Park police officer named David Reyes, who had been on duty at the island's security station. The three of them examined the bundle under the bright fluorescent lights of the administration office, and Chen made the decision to open it. She cut through the layers of plastic bags carefully, using scissors and wearing latex gloves, documenting each layer with photographs. Inside the bags were multiple items, each wrapped separately in additional plastic. Chen unwrapped them one by one, placing them on a clean white sheet of paper on the desk, cataloguing each item as it was revealed. 3 cell phones, older models, smartphones from the mid-2010s, their screens cracked and their batteries long dead, but otherwise intact. 2 digital cameras, compact point-and-shoot models of the kind tourists carried before smartphones made dedicated cameras obsolete, a small notebook with a leather cover, its pages filled with handwriting, a wallet containing credit cards, a driver's license, and several $20 bills, a second wallet with similar contents, a third wallet, this one smaller, with a student ID card visible through a clear plastic window, and a note written on a piece of paper that had been laminated to protect it from moisture, folded once and placed in its own plastic bag. Chen unfolded the note and read it aloud, her voice growing quieter as she processed the words. "If you're reading this, then we didn't make it off the island. My name is Michael Torres. I'm here with my wife Rachel and our daughter Emma. It's October 31st, 2018, about 11 p.m. We came to Alcatraz for the special night tour, the Halloween tour that they do every year, but something went wrong. We got separated from our tour group, and now we can't find anyone. The doors are locked. The ferries have stopped running. We've been trying to find a way out, but every exit is blocked. We can hear something in the building with us. Something or someone. We're hiding in D block right now, but I don't think we're safe here. If something happens to us, please tell our families we love them. Please find whoever did this." The tour guide's name was Stephen Walsh. He was supposed to keep the group together, but he disappeared right after we got into the cell house. This wasn't an accident. Someone planned this. Chen set the note down and looked at Reyes and Webb, her face pale. "October 31st, 2018, she said. "That's 6 years ago. There was a missing persons case. I remember it. A family of 3 disappeared during the night tour. They never found them." Reyes was already on his radio, calling for backup, requesting that a National Park Service criminal investigator be dispatched to Alcatraz immediately, notifying the San Francisco Police Department and the FBI. Webb stood quietly, staring at the items on the desk, the phones, the wallets, the cameras, the note, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold night air coming through the window. 3 people had vanished from Alcatraz 6 years ago, during a crowded tour where there should have been witnesses, where there should have been security, where there should have been no way for someone to simply disappear. And now their personal effects had been found hidden in a ventilation duct in the most isolated part of the prison, accompanied by a note suggesting they hadn't left willingly, that they had been trapped, that someone had done this to them deliberately. If you've ever been on a tour at Alcatraz, surrounded by other visitors and guides and park rangers, and felt like the place was safe and controlled and manageable, then what happened to the Torres family is going to change how you think about historic sites and about how quickly a normal tourist experience can turn into something out of a nightmare. And if you want to see how investigators unraveled what happened that Halloween night 6 years ago, then stay with me, because this case is going to take us into territory that makes everyone who works at national parks very uncomfortable. Special Agent Angela Martinez arrived at Alcatraz at 10:45 p.m., taking a special boat dispatch from Pier 33 in San Francisco. Martinez was with the National Park Service Investigative Services Branch, the law enforcement arm of the Park Service responsible for investigating crimes that occurred on federal lands, including national parks, monuments, and historic sites. She had been with ISB for 12 years, had worked cases ranging from theft and vandalism to assaults and homicides, and she had investigated multiple disappearances in various parks across the western United States. The Torres family case was familiar to her. She had been part of the original investigation in 2018, had interviewed witnesses and reviewed security footage and searched the island extensively, and had been frustrated by the complete absence of evidence explaining what had happened to 3 people who had simply vanished during a crowded tour. Martinez was met at the dock by Chen, Reyes, and Webb, and they escorted her to the administration building where the evidence was laid out. Martinez examined each item carefully, photographing everything, making notes, comparing what she was seeing to her memories of the original investigation. She picked up the note and read it multiple times, analyzing the handwriting, the word choices, the details that Michael Torres had included. "This is consistent with what we knew about the family," Martinez said. "Michael Torres, age 38, software engineer. Rachel Torres, age 36, elementary school teacher. Emma Torres, age 14, student at Lincoln High School in San Francisco. They bought tickets for the special Halloween night tour on October 31st, 2018. The tour was sold out, about 300 people in total, broken into smaller groups of 25 to 30 that were led by different guides through the cell house. The Torres family was in a group led by a guide named Stephen Walsh, who was a seasonal interpretive ranger working for the Park Service. At some point during the tour, the family went missing. Walsh reported they were with the group when they entered the cell house, but that when he did a head count about 20 minutes later, they were gone. "We searched the entire island, used dogs, checked every building and every accessible space. We found nothing." Martinez paused, looking at the cell phones and cameras. "If we can extract data from these devices, we might finally get answers about what happened." Phones from 2018 should have substantial storage, probably photos and videos and text messages and GPS data. And the cameras might have images from the tour. "Let me get these to our forensic lab." The evidence was packaged and documented, chain of custody forms were completed, and Martinez arranged for everything to be transported to the NPS Forensic Laboratory in San Francisco. The lab was a specialized facility that handled evidence from parks across the region, with capabilities for digital forensics, DNA analysis, fingerprint processing, and other investigative techniques. Martinez personally delivered the evidence to the lab that night, meeting with the lab director and requesting priority processing given the age of the case and the potential significance of the findings. The digital forensics team began work immediately, starting with the cell phones. The phones were iPhone models from 2017 and 2018, with cracked screens but with their internal storage likely intact if the devices hadn't suffered water damage or catastrophic physical trauma. The forensic technician, a man named Robert Kim, who had worked for the Park Service for 9 years and who had previously worked for the FBI's Digital Forensics Lab, carefully opened each phone, extracted the memory chips, and used specialized equipment to read the data. The first phone belonged to Rachel Torres. The extraction process took several hours, but by dawn on October 16th, Kim had recovered substantial data, including text messages, photos, and app data. The most recent photos on the phone were from October 31st, 2018, starting at approximately 6:30 p.m., when the Torres family had boarded the ferry at Pier 33 to travel to Alcatraz for the night tour. The photos showed a typical tourist experience: the family posing on the ferry, the approach to Alcatraz Island with the famous cell house visible on the rocky outcrop, Emma Torres taking a selfie with the Golden Gate Bridge in the background. After arriving on the island, there were photos of the family walking up the hill toward the cell house, passing the ruins of the warden's house and the recreation yard. The photos were time-stamped, providing a precise timeline of the family's movements. At 7:15 p.m., there were photos from inside the cell house, showing the rows of cells, the narrow corridors, the oppressive atmosphere of the prison interior. The tour groups typically spent about an hour in the cell house, with guides leading them through different sections and providing historical information about the prison's operations and the inmates who had been housed there. The photos showed Emma posing in front of various cells, Rachel and Michael standing together in Broadway, the main corridor of the cell house, and several shots of other tourists in the group. Faces that might be identifiable if investigators needed to track down witnesses. At 7:42 p.m., there was a photo that made Kim pause. It showed a long corridor, poorly lit, with cells visible on one side and a solid wall on the other. The photo was blurry, taken hastily, and the angle suggested Rachel had been holding the phone at waist level rather than up near her face, as if she had been trying to photograph something without being obvious about it. In the background of the photo, partially obscured by shadow, there appeared to be a figure standing at the far end of the corridor. The figure was too far away and too poorly lit to make out details, but its posture suggested it was watching the person taking the photo. The next photo was taken at 7:44 p.m., just 2 minutes later. It showed Emma Torres looking frightened, her eyes wide, her face pale in the flash of the camera. The photo appeared to have been taken in a cell, with the distinctive barred door visible in the frame. The next several photos were dark, underexposed, showing nothing but shadows and blurred motion, as if Rachel had been holding the phone without looking at the screen, perhaps while running or hiding. At 7:51 p.m., there was a video. Kim opened the file and watched with growing concern. The video was shaky, the audio was muffled, but Rachel Torres's voice was audible, speaking in a frightened whisper. "Michael, where are we? I can't see the group anymore. Emma, stay close to me. Michael, do you see anyone?" Michael Torres's voice, also whispering. "The lights went out in this section. I think we took a wrong turn. Let's go back the way we came." Emma Torres: "Dad, I don't like this. Where's the tour guide? Where's everyone else?" The video showed the family moving through a darkened corridor, using the phone's flashlight to illuminate their path. The beam of light revealed cells on both sides, doors hanging open, the interiors pitch black. The family's footsteps echoed on the concrete floor, and their breathing was audible, rapid and shallow, the sound of people who were scared but trying to stay calm. The video ended abruptly at 7:53 p.m., the screen going black, as if Rachel had turned off the phone, or as if the phone had been dropped or knocked from her hand. That was the last data from Rachel's phone. Kim moved to the second phone, which belonged to Michael Torres. The data extraction revealed similar content, photos from the ferry and the early part of the tour. But Michael's phone had been used to take video more frequently than photos. There were several video clips from inside the cell house, documenting the tour guide's narration, showing the cells and the facilities, capturing Emma's reactions as she learned about the prison's history. But at 7:46 p.m., there was a video that changed everything. Michael had been recording when the lights in their section of the cell house went out. The video showed the tour group, about 25 people including the Torres family, standing in a corridor when suddenly all the lights went dark. There were gasps and nervous laughter from the tourists, and the tour guide's voice, calm and reassuring, saying, "It's okay, folks, this happens sometimes. The electrical system is old, and circuits trip occasionally. Stay where you are, don't move around in the dark, and I'll get my flashlight out. The backup lights should come on in a moment." But the backup lights didn't come on. The video showed the tour guide, a young man who fit the description of Stephen Walsh, using his flashlight to illuminate the group, counting heads, trying to keep everyone calm. And then, while the guide was focused on the group, a door at the far end of the corridor opened, silhouetting a figure against dim light from beyond. The figure appeared to be wearing dark clothing and was moving quickly, purposefully. The video showed the guide noticing the figure and calling out, "Hey sir, this area is closed to the public. You need to return to your group." The figure didn't respond, didn't stop, just moved through the doorway and disappeared. The guide hesitated, clearly uncertain whether to pursue the figure or stay with his group. And in that moment of hesitation, the lights came back on. The video showed the guide doing another head count, and this time his expression changed from calm to concerned. "Okay, everyone, I need you to stay right here. Don't move. I'm missing 3 people from our group. Has anyone seen the family that was standing near the back? Man, woman, and a teenage girl?" The video captured several tourists looking around, shaking their heads, saying they hadn't noticed anyone leaving. And then Michael's voice, from off-camera, speaking urgently, "We're here, we're right here, we didn't go anywhere." The video showed the guide turning, his flashlight beam sweeping across the group, and then his face appeared on camera, close, concerned. "Sir, you need to stay with the group. Where were you during the power outage?" "We were right here." Michael's voice, confused, frightened. "We didn't move. What are you talking about?" The video ended. The timestamp showed 7:48 p.m. There was no more data from Michael's phone after that point. Kim moved to the third phone, which belonged to Emma Torres. The phone was a slightly older model, and the data was more limited, but there were photos from the tour and several text messages that Emma had sent to friends before the power outage. Messages describing how creepy Alcatraz was and how excited she was to be on the Halloween tour. But there was one piece of data on Emma's phone that was different from the others, a voice memo, recorded at 8:03 p.m., 15 minutes after Michael's video had ended. Kim played the memo, and what he heard made his blood run cold. Emma's voice, barely above a whisper, terrified. "Mom, Dad, if you can hear this, I don't know where you are. We got separated when the lights came back on. I tried to follow the group, but I couldn't find them. I'm in a cell right now, hiding. I can hear footsteps outside. Someone's out there. They're looking for me. I'm scared. Please find me, please." There was silence for several seconds, and then Emma's voice again, even quieter. "I hear someone at the cell door. They're trying to get in. The door's locked, but I don't think it's going to hold. Mom, Dad, I love you. I'm sorry. I should have stayed closer to you. I should have." The voice memo ended. The file was corrupted after that point, suggesting the phone had been damaged or had shut down abruptly. Kim sat back from his workstation, feeling sick. He had worked dozens of cases involving missing persons, had extracted data from phones recovered from crime scenes and accident sites, but there was something particularly disturbing about hearing a 14-year-old girl record what appeared to be her final words, alone and terrified in a locked cell in one of America's most notorious prisons. He compiled the data into a report and sent it to Agent Martinez, flagging the most significant files and providing timestamps and metadata for each piece of evidence. Martinez received the report at 8 a.m. on October 16th and immediately convened a meeting with the investigative team. The meeting took place at the NPS regional office in San Francisco, in a conference room with views of the bay and the Golden Gate Bridge. Present were Martinez, Chen from Alcatraz operations, representatives from the San Francisco Police Department, an FBI agent assigned to assist with the case, and the Park Service's regional director, a man named Harold Davidson, who had ultimate authority over operations at Alcatraz and other park sites in the region. Martinez presented the evidence, playing the videos and audio files, showing the photos, walking the team through the timeline that could be reconstructed from the digital data. The timeline showed a family on a normal tour that had taken a horrifying turn when the lights went out, when they became separated from their group, and when someone or something had hunted them through the darkened corridors of the prison. "The question we need to answer," Martinez said, "is who or what was hunting them and what happened to the bodies, because we searched this island extensively in 2018 and we found nothing. No bodies, no blood, no physical evidence that the family had been harmed. But now we have their phones, their wallets, their cameras, hidden in a vent in D Block. Someone put those items there, someone who knew where the family had been, who had access to their personal effects, and who wanted to hide the evidence." The FBI agent, a woman named Patricia Vasquez, who specialized in crimes on federal property, spoke up. "We need to focus on the tour guide, Stephen Walsh. He's mentioned in Michael Torres's note, and he was the last person known to have seen the family before they disappeared. What do we know about him?" Martinez pulled up a file on the conference room's display screen. Stephen Walsh, age 26 in 2018, hired as a seasonal interpretive ranger in May 2018. He had a bachelor's degree in history from San Francisco State, had worked as a guide at other historic sites including Fort Point and the Presidio. His background check was clean, no criminal history, good references from previous employers. After the Torres family disappeared, Walsh was interviewed extensively by investigators, including me. He claimed he didn't know what happened to them, that they had been with the group when the power went out, and that when the lights came back on, they were gone. He seemed genuinely distressed about the situation. We had no evidence to suggest he was involved in their disappearance, so he wasn't charged with anything. He continued working at Alcatraz through the end of the 2018 season, and then his contract wasn't renewed. "Where is he now?" Vasquez asked. "That's what we need to find out," Martinez said. "I'm going to track him down and bring him in for questioning. 6 years ago we didn't have this evidence. Now we do, and I want to see how he explains it. If you're still following this investigation, from the discovery of the hidden items to the chilling phone data to the search for answers about what really happened that Halloween night, then consider subscribing, because what investigators are about to uncover is going to reveal a conspiracy that goes deeper than anyone imagined, and that calls into question everything we thought we knew about how historic sites are managed and secured. Martinez assigned a team to locate Stephen Walsh. The search began with standard databases, DMV records, employment records, social media accounts. Walsh had worked several different jobs since leaving Alcatraz in 2018, including stints as a museum guide in Sacramento, a park ranger at Point Reyes National Seashore, and most recently as a tour operator for a private company that ran ghost tours in San Francisco. The team tracked him to an apartment in the Sunset District, a modest 2-bedroom unit that he shared with a roommate. Martinez and 2 San Francisco Police Department detectives knocked on Walsh's door at 6 p.m. on October 16th. Walsh answered, and Martinez identified herself and asked if Walsh would be willing to come to the federal building to answer some questions about an ongoing investigation. Walsh, looking nervous but not surprised, agreed. He said he had been expecting someone to contact him ever since he'd heard about the discovery at Alcatraz. News of the janitor finding evidence in the vent had leaked to the media, and while details were being withheld, the basic story was public knowledge. At the federal building, Walsh was brought to an interview room and read his rights. He declined to have an attorney present, saying he wanted to cooperate fully and that he had nothing to hide. Martinez began the interview by asking Walsh to describe what he remembered about October 31st, 2018, and Walsh's account was consistent with what he had said during the original investigation. "I was leading a tour group through the cell house," Walsh said. "It was a special Halloween night tour, so we had a larger than normal number of visitors, and the tours were running later than usual. My group had about 27 people, including the Torres family, a dad, a mom, and a teenage daughter. They seemed like nice people, interested in the history, asking good questions. We were in the D block area when the power went out. It was completely dark, and people were nervous, but I tried to keep everyone calm. I used my flashlight to do a head count, and that's when I realized the Torres family was missing. I reported it immediately, and the park police conducted a search, but they never found them." Martinez leaned forward. "Stephen, we found their phones and wallets hidden in a vent in D block. The phones contain videos and audio recordings from that night. We know the family didn't just wander off. Something happened to them, and I think you know what it was." Walsh's expression changed, fear and guilt flickering across his face. He was silent for a long moment, and then he said quietly, "I didn't hurt them. I swear to God, I didn't hurt them, but I know who did." Martinez felt her pulse quicken. "Tell me." Walsh took a deep breath. "There was a group operating on the island, not Park Service employees, at least not officially. They called themselves the Keepers. They were people who were obsessed with Alcatraz's history, with the idea that the prison should be preserved exactly as it was, that too many tourists were damaging the site, that the Park Service was turning it into Disneyland, instead of treating it as a sacred memorial to the men who had been imprisoned there. Some of them were former employees, some were volunteers, some were just enthusiasts who had access to the island and who knew its secrets." "What did they do?" Martinez asked. "They conducted their own tours," Walsh said. "Secret tours, late at night after the regular tours ended. They would hide on the island when the last ferry left, staying in areas where they wouldn't be found, and then they would come out at night and explore places that tourists aren't allowed to go. They had keys to locked doors, they knew how to bypass security systems, and they had created their own spaces in the prison, hidden rooms, storage areas, places where they kept supplies and equipment." "And the Torres family encountered them?" "Yes. The power outage wasn't an accident. It was planned. The Keepers had figured out how to trip specific circuits in the electrical system, creating darkness in certain areas while keeping other areas lit. They would use the darkness to move around without being seen, to access parts of the prison that were off-limits. That night, when the power went out in D Block, one of the Keepers appeared. I saw him on camera footage later. Well, not official Park Service cameras, but cameras that the Keepers had installed themselves to monitor activity on the island. The Keepers had their own surveillance system, completely separate from the Park Service system, and they used it to watch for opportunities. Opportunities for what? Walsh hesitated, then said, "To take people, to bring them into their world." The Keepers believed that some visitors to Alcatraz were special, that they had a deeper connection to the prison's history, and that those people should be given the opportunity to experience what it was really like to be an inmate. They would identify targets during regular tours, people who seemed particularly interested, particularly enthusiastic, and they would arrange for those people to be separated from their groups. They would take them to hidden areas of the prison and conduct their own tours. They called it the real Alcatraz experience. Martinez felt a chill run down her spine. "You're telling me there was a group of people kidnapping tourists on Alcatraz and subjecting them to some kind of immersive prison experience?" "Yes, but it wasn't supposed to be harmful. The Keepers weren't trying to hurt anyone. They just wanted to show people what prison was really like, to make them understand the history on a deeper level. They would take someone, lock them in a cell for a few hours, give them the experience of isolation and confinement, and then release them with instructions not to tell anyone. They believed they were providing an educational service, that they were honoring the memory of the inmates who had suffered in the prison. And the Torres family." Walsh's face crumpled. "Something went wrong." I don't know exactly what happened, but the keepers took the Torres family that night. They separated them from the group during the power outage, took them to a hidden area of the prison, and they didn't come back. I reported the family missing. The Park Service searched the island, but the keepers had places where they could hide people, places that aren't on any maps, places that even most Park Service employees don't know about. By the time I realized what had happened, it was too late. Why didn't you tell anyone about the keepers during the original investigation? Because I was scared, Walsh said, his voice breaking. The keepers made it clear that if I talked, I would be next. They knew where I lived, they knew my routines, and they had resources that I didn't understand. I thought if I just kept quiet, if I played along, they would leave me alone. But I couldn't keep working at Alcatraz after that. I quit at the end of the season and tried to move on with my life. But I've had nightmares about it every night for 6 years. Martinez leaned back in her chair, processing what Walsh had said. I need names. I need you to tell me who the keepers were, how many of them there were, and how we can find them. Walsh provided names. 4 men and 2 women, ranging in age from early 30s to late 60s. Some had been Park Service employees or volunteers. Some had been private citizens with no official connection to Alcatraz, but with deep knowledge of the island's history and layout. Walsh described how the group operated, meeting in secret locations off the island, communicating through encrypted messaging apps, coordinating their activities to avoid detection by Park Service security and law enforcement. Martinez thanked Walsh for his cooperation and ended the interview. Walsh was not arrested. He agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation and to testify if charges were brought against the keepers, but he was advised not to leave the area and to remain available for further questioning. Over the following weeks, Martinez and her team worked to verify Walsh's account and to locate the members of the keepers. The investigation revealed that Walsh's story was accurate in its broad outlines but incomplete in its details. The keepers had indeed been operating on Alcatraz for years, conducting unauthorized activities and creating a parallel infrastructure of hidden spaces and surveillance equipment. But their activities had been more extensive and more dangerous than Walsh had known. The team obtained warrants and searched the homes and vehicles of the individuals Walsh had named. They found evidence confirming the existence of the group, encrypted communications, discussing operations on the island, keys and access cards that shouldn't have been in their possession, photographs and videos showing hidden areas of the prison that weren't accessible to the public or even to most Park Service personnel. They also found evidence of multiple experiences that the keepers had conducted over a period of at least 5 years. There were records, written logs and video files documenting over 30 instances where tourists had been taken from their groups, subjected to hours of confinement in locked cells, and then released with threats to keep silent. Most of the incidents had involved single individuals or couples, people who had been chosen because they appeared vulnerable or because they had expressed particular interest in the prison's history. But the Torres family case was different. The record showed that something had gone wrong, that the family had resisted, that there had been a struggle, and that the situation had escalated beyond what the keepers had intended. One of the keepers, a man named Richard Donovan, who had worked as a maintenance supervisor at Alcatraz from 2010 to 2017, was arrested on November 3, 2024, at his home in Oakland. Donovan initially refused to speak to investigators, but when confronted with the evidence from the seized records and from Walsh's testimony, he agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. Donovan's account provided the missing pieces of the puzzle. On October 31, 2018, the keepers had identified the Torres family as potential targets for an experience. Michael Torres had been asking detailed questions about escape attempts and about what it was like to be an inmate, and the keepers had decided he would be an ideal participant in one of their immersive tours. The plan had been to separate the family from their tour group during a planned power outage, take them to a hidden section of the prison, lock them in cells for 2 to 3 hours to give them the real Alcatraz experience, and then release them with instructions to tell Park Service authorities they had simply gotten lost and had found their own way out. But when the power went out and the keepers approached the family, Michael Torres had immediately understood that something was wrong. He had tried to protect his wife and daughter, had fought with the keepers, and in the struggle Emma had been injured. Donovan claimed it was an accident, that she had fallen and hit her head while trying to run away. The keepers had panicked. They had intended to conduct a controlled experience, not to harm anyone, but now they had a teenager with a head injury and a family that was terrified and screaming for help. The keepers had made the decision to move the family to one of their hidden spaces, a section of the prison that had been sealed off during the 1960s and that was accessed through a concealed door in the basement. They had taken the family there, had tried to provide medical care for Emma, but she had died from her injuries within hours. Rachel and Michael Torres, desperate and grief-stricken, had tried to escape, but the keepers had prevented them, fearing that if the family was released, they would report what had happened, and the keepers would be prosecuted. The keepers had kept Rachel and Michael imprisoned in the hidden section for 3 days, during which time the massive search for the missing family had been underway above ground. The keepers had monitored the search from their hidden positions, had watched as Park Service personnel and police had combed the island, and had known that discovery was inevitable if they didn't act. On November 3, 2018, the keepers had made the decision to eliminate the witnesses. Donovan claimed this decision hadn't been unanimous, that some members of the group had argued for releasing Rachel and Michael and facing the consequences, but others, led by a man named Carl Hoffman, who had been a Park Service ranger in the 1990s, had insisted that the only way to avoid prosecution was to ensure the family could never testify about what had happened. Rachel and Michael Torres had been killed, their bodies disposed of in a way that Donovan refused to describe in detail, but that he said involved the ocean and weights. The keepers had then collected all of the family's personal effects, phones, wallets, cameras, and had hidden them in the ventilation duct in D Block, believing that if the items were ever found, they would be so far from the actual location of the crimes that investigators would never be able to piece together what had happened. The keepers had then gone underground, dissolving their organization, destroying most of their records, and agreeing to never speak about the incident again. They had assumed that without bodies and without evidence, the Torres family would be listed as missing and presumed drowned, and that the case would eventually go cold. They had been correct for 6 years, but the discovery of the hidden evidence had changed everything. Martinez coordinated with the FBI, the San Francisco Police Department, and the U.S. Attorney's Office to bring charges against the keepers. 6 individuals were arrested and charged with kidnapping resulting in death, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, murder in furtherance of kidnapping, concealment of death, and obstruction of justice. The charges carried potential sentences ranging from life in prison to the death penalty. The investigation also revealed the locations where the keepers claimed to have disposed of the bodies. A search operation was organized, involving the Coast Guard, FBI evidence recovery teams, and specialized search personnel. The search focused on areas of San Francisco Bay where the keepers had access and where weighted bodies could have been deposited with minimal risk of discovery. In December 2024, the remains of Rachel Torres and Michael Torres were recovered from the bay, in water approximately 60 feet deep, in a location south of Alcatraz where currents and bottom conditions had preserved enough of the bodies to allow identification through DNA analysis. Emma Torres's remains were recovered a week later from a different location, also in the bay. The medical examiner confirmed that all 3 had died from trauma. Emma from blunt force head trauma, Rachel and Michael from what appeared to be strangulation or suffocation, though the decomposition of the bodies made definitive determination of cause of death difficult. The recovery of the bodies allowed the Torres family to be laid to rest and provided the evidence needed to prosecute the keepers. The trial took place in federal court in San Francisco in the spring of 2025, with all 6 defendants tried together in a case that drew national media attention and that raised profound questions about security at national parks and historic sites. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: the testimony of Stephen Walsh and Richard Donovan, the records seized from the keepers, the digital evidence from the family's phones, and the physical evidence from the bodies. The defense argued that while the keepers had engaged in unauthorized activities on Alcatraz, they had not intended to harm anyone, and that the deaths had been accidents or had been the result of panic rather than premeditation. The jury didn't buy it. After 3 weeks of testimony and 2 days of deliberation, they convicted all 6 defendants on all counts. Carl Hoffman, identified as the leader of the group and the person who had made the decision to kill Rachel and Michael Torres, was sentenced to death. The other 5 defendants received life sentences without the possibility of parole. The case prompted a complete overhaul of security procedures at Alcatraz and at other national park sites. The National Park Service conducted a comprehensive review of operations, looking for vulnerabilities that could be exploited by individuals or groups seeking unauthorized access. They installed new surveillance systems, implemented stricter access controls, increased security patrols, and created protocols for preventing and responding to incidents where visitors became separated from their groups. The Park Service also conducted a thorough search of Alcatraz to identify and seal off all hidden spaces that had been created or used by the keepers. The search revealed a network of concealed doors, passages and rooms that had been unknown to current Park Service management, spaces that had been created during the prison's operational years and that had been forgotten or deliberately hidden during subsequent renovations and modifications. These spaces were documented, secured, and in some cases made accessible for historic preservation purposes, but with safeguards to prevent unauthorized use. The Torres family story became widely known through media coverage and through a documentary that aired on Netflix in 2026. The documentary, titled The Keepers of Alcatraz, examined the case in detail, featuring interviews with investigators, prosecutors, surviving family members, and experts on the psychology of obsession and group dynamics. The documentary was praised for its sensitive handling of the victims and for its exploration of how a group of people who claimed to be honoring history had instead committed horrific crimes in its name. Michael Torres's parents, who had raised Emma after their son and daughter-in-law disappeared and who had held out hope for 6 years that their family would be found alive, established a foundation in memory of Michael, Rachel, and Emma. The foundation provided support for families of missing persons and funded research into improving security and emergency response at tourist attractions and public venues. Marcus Webb, the janitor who had found the evidence in the vent, received recognition from the National Park Service for his role in breaking the case. He continued working at Alcatraz, but he said the discovery had changed how he viewed his job, making him more aware of the island's dark history and of the importance of vigilance in maintaining safety and security. Sarah Chen, the night operations coordinator, who had been the first Park Service employee to see the evidence, worked with federal prosecutors to improve training for Park Service personnel in recognizing and responding to suspicious activities. She became an advocate for stronger security measures at historic sites and for better coordination between Park Service security and local law enforcement. Special Agent Angela Martinez received a commendation from the National Park Service and from the FBI for her work on the case. She continued investigating crimes at national parks, but the Torres case remained one that haunted her, a reminder of how vulnerable visitors could be, even in places that seemed safe and controlled, and of how important it was to never give up on cold cases, no matter how much time had passed. Alcatraz Island remained one of San Francisco's most popular tourist attractions, drawing over 1 million visitors per year. But the tragedy of the Torres family became part of the island's narrative, a dark chapter that was acknowledged in updated tour materials and that served as a reminder that history wasn't just about the past, but about the present as well, about the need for vigilance and responsibility and respect for the people who visited historic sites seeking education and inspiration. The night tours at Alcatraz continued, but with enhanced security measures and with strict protocols for ensuring that all visitors remained with their groups and that no one was left behind when the tours ended. The Halloween tours, which had been suspended after the Torres family disappeared in 2018, resumed in 2026 with additional safety measures and with park rangers explicitly addressing the incident, using it as a teaching moment about the importance of staying with your group and following instructions. The hidden ventilation duct in D Block, where the evidence had been found, was sealed and marked with a small plaque noting that it had been the location of a significant discovery in a federal investigation. The plaque didn't provide details about the case, but rangers who led tours through D Block sometimes mentioned the Torres family when discussing the island's more recent history, ensuring that Michael, Rachel, and Emma were remembered not as anonymous missing persons, but as real people who had been victims of a terrible crime. The case also led to broader discussions about the culture of obsession that could develop around historic sites. Scholars and psychologists examined how the keepers had justified their actions, how they had convinced themselves that kidnapping and imprisoning tourists was an educational service rather than a crime, and how group dynamics had allowed rational individuals to participate in increasingly extreme activities. The consensus was that the keepers represented an extreme example of a phenomenon that existed to some degree at many historic sites. People who became so obsessed with preserving or experiencing history that they lost sight of ethical boundaries and of the rights and safety of others. The National Park Service used the case to develop new training materials for employees and volunteers, teaching them to recognize warning signs of obsessive behavior and to report concerns to supervisors. The training emphasized that loving history was admirable, but that respecting the people who visited historic sites was paramount, and that no interpretive goal or preservation objective justified compromising visitor safety. The families of the other tourists who had been subjected to experiences by the keepers came forward after the trial, many of them for the first time revealing what had happened to them. Their accounts described hours of confinement in locked cells, psychological manipulation designed to make them feel what it was like to be an inmate, and threats to keep silent about their experiences. Most had been too frightened or too embarrassed to report what had happened, believing that authorities wouldn't believe them, or that they would be blamed for somehow having invited the experience. The revelation that dozens of tourists had been victimized over a period of years led to civil lawsuits against the National Park Service for failing to maintain adequate security and for failing to detect and stop the keepers' activities. The lawsuits were settled out of court, with the Park Service acknowledging responsibility for security failures and agreeing to implement comprehensive reforms. The settlements provided compensation to victims and funded counseling services for people who had been traumatized by their experiences. The case became a subject of study in criminology courses, in courses on group psychology, and in training programs for law enforcement and security personnel. It was cited as an example of how criminal enterprises could operate in plain sight, how authority figures could abuse their positions, and how seemingly innocent organizations could harbor dangerous individuals. It was also used as an example of the importance of thorough investigation and of never accepting easy explanations for disappearances or other unexplained events. The ventilation duct, where Marcus Webb had found the evidence, became a symbol of how truth could remain hidden for years, but could eventually surface if people remained vigilant and if investigations remained active. The fact that the evidence had been deliberately hidden by the perpetrators, placed in a location where it might never be found, added to the case's notoriety and to its value as a teaching example. Special Agent Martinez, reflecting on the case in interviews years later, emphasized that the Torres family's story was ultimately about the failure of institutions to protect people who had put their trust in those institutions. The family went to Alcatraz believing it was a safe, controlled environment, Martinez said. They believed that park rangers and tour guides were there to protect them, that security systems were in place to prevent harm, and that if something went wrong, help would be immediately available. All of those assumptions turned out to be false. The keepers were able to operate for years because of institutional failures, because of inadequate security, because of a culture that prioritized access and visitor experience over safety. The lesson from this case is that we can never be complacent, that we must constantly evaluate and improve our security measures, and that we must listen when people report unusual incidents or suspicious behavior. The case also highlighted the importance of digital forensics in solving cold cases. The fact that the Torres family's phones had been preserved and that data could be extracted even after 6 years underwater in sealed plastic bags demonstrated the resilience of modern technology and the value of preserving evidence even when immediate analysis isn't possible. The phones had provided the timeline, the context, and the evidence of what had happened during those final hours, and they had given investigators the information needed to identify suspects and to understand the scope of the conspiracy. The cameras that had been found with the phones contained additional photos from the ferry ride and from the early part of the tour, images that showed the family happy and excited, unaware of what was about to happen. The photos were given to the Torres family's relatives and were used in the memorial services, reminding everyone who saw them of the humanity of the victims, of the fact that they had been real people with hopes and plans and people who loved them. The notebook that had been found in the hidden bundle contained Michael Torres's handwritten notes about Alcatraz's history, questions he had wanted to ask the tour guide, and observations about the prison's architecture and design. The notebook was poignant evidence of Michael's genuine interest in the site and of his enthusiasm for learning about history, interests that the keepers had cynically exploited to justify targeting him and his family. The case remained a cautionary tale, a reminder that even in the 21st century, in a major American city, at one of the country's most famous tourist attractions, people could still disappear and die under circumstances that seemed impossible. The Torres family's story was a tragedy, but it was also a testament to the power of investigation, the importance of never giving up on finding answers, and the value of evidence in bringing justice to victims and accountability to perpetrators. Marcus Webb, continuing his work at Alcatraz, often thought about the moment when he had opened that ventilation grill and seen the bundle hidden in the duct. He thought about how easy it would have been to miss it, to assume the blockage was just debris or an animal's nest, to clear it without looking closely. He thought about how different the outcome would have been if the evidence had remained hidden for another 6 years, or 10 years, or forever. And he thought about the responsibility that came with his job, the awareness that every task he performed, no matter how routine, might be the moment when something significant was discovered. The hidden spaces of Alcatraz, once used by the keepers for their criminal activities, were now part of the official tour experience in limited and carefully controlled ways. The Park Service had decided that rather than simply sealing off the spaces and pretending they didn't exist. It was better to acknowledge them and to use them as teaching tools about the importance of security and about the dangers of obsession and extremism. Visitors on specialized tours could see some of the concealed doors and passages, could learn about how they had been used, and could understand how easily institutions could be infiltrated and manipulated by determined individuals. The Torres family's legacy was one of awareness, of vigilance, and of the recognition that safety required constant effort and attention. Their deaths had been tragic and preventable, the result of institutional failures and of individuals who had allowed their obsession with history to override their basic humanity. But their story had led to changes that made other visitors safer, that improved security at national parks across the country, and that ensured that future generations would be better protected. And in the end, that was what Michael Torres had asked for in his note, hidden in the vent. He had asked that someone find whoever had done this to his family, that justice be served, and that their story be told. 6 years later, all of those requests had been fulfilled. The keepers had been caught, tried, and sentenced. The story had been told, and Michael, Rachel, and Emma Torres, though gone, were remembered and mourned and honored by a nation that had been shocked by their fate, and that had committed to ensuring that nothing like it would ever happen again.